They told me I was just covering for an hour. One room, one kid. Simple, but that room hasn't felt right since. And I know what I saw in there wasn't alive. I was a substitute teacher, usually for middle schools around the district, and most of my assignments were harmless pop-in, hand out worksheets, monitor kids until the bell rang. But one Thursday last winter, the school secretary called and asked if I could stay a little later. The regular detention supervisor had called out last minute, and they had one student scheduled. All I had to do was keep the kid in room 206 until 4:30. I agreed. Easy money. It was already dark by the time the final bell rang. A cold rain had started up, tapping lightly against the tall, narrow windows as the building emptied. I waited near the front office for a few minutes, double-checking the clipboard. The student's name was written in neat black ink. Mason Del Rey, grade 8, skipped 4th period. I didn't recognize the name, but that wasn't unusual. Substitutes rarely know the kids. I made my way up to room 206, which sat in the oldest wing of the school, the original 1950s building before they added the modern extension. The hallway was dim, the motion sensor lights slow to respond, and everything smelled faintly of old paper and cleaning bleach. When I opened the classroom door, I stopped short. There was already a student sitting at the desk closest to the window. He had his head down, arms folded, like he'd been waiting a long time. No phone, no backpack, just this stiff, silent posture that felt strangely heavy. His hoodie was pulled up, shadowing his face, but I could see that he was pale, very pale, even in the faint light from the hallway. I stepped in slowly. "Hey, Mason?" I asked. He didn't answer, didn't move. I assumed he was sulking, annoyed to be there. I sat at the teacher's desk and pulled out a crossword to kill time. For the next 15 minutes, the room stayed eerily quiet. No fidgeting, no coughs, not even breathing that I could hear. I glanced up a few times, but the kid hadn't budged, just sat there like a statue. I tried speaking again. "Listen, man, I don't care what you did. Just hang out for 30 minutes and we're good. You want a hall pass for water or something?" Still nothing. At 4:10, the door creaked open and a security officer poked his head in. "Hey, just checking. The kid show up?" I gestured toward the window. "Yeah, he's been here the whole time." The officer frowned. "Where?" I turned to point, but the desk was empty. Not just empty. It was dust-covered, like it hadn't been used in years. A fine, grayish film coated the surface, the chair tucked neatly beneath it. I froze. "I swear he was just there," I muttered, my voice shaking a little. The officer stepped in, scanned the room, then looked at me strangely. "There's no Mason Del Rey enrolled here," he said. "That name doesn't exist in the system. Never has." I laughed nervously. "Check the clipboard, his name's right there." We both walked back to the front office. I handed the clipboard over. His name was gone. Just a blank line. The secretary looked confused. "You said someone showed up?" I nodded slowly. "Yes. Hoodie, pale skin, didn't say a word." She stared at me for a long moment before turning to the filing cabinet behind her. She pulled out an old, faded folder labeled Incidents -2006. Flipping through, she pulled out a photo. It was a yearbook picture, grade 8, name Mason Del Rey. My stomach twisted. Same hoodie, same blank stare, but the date on the page was from 19 years ago. "Mason used to sneak out of class through the boiler room," she said quietly. "One day, he never came back. They searched for weeks. Eventually found his backpack, but not him. Some say he got trapped behind the old foundation walls when the school was being renovated. Others say he ran away, but every now and then, she trailed off." The security guard added, "Room 206 used to be his homeroom. Teachers say sometimes they see someone sitting there during detention. Quiet, hoodie pulled up, always gone by the time they check." I didn't sleep that night. I didn't go back to that school either, but a few weeks later, I got a substitute request from the same district. The note at the bottom just said, "Detention, room 206, one student." They said it was sealed for good. Every new hire was told not to touch the third-floor east bathroom, just clean around it and move on. The door was padlocked, the windows blacked out from the inside, and the janitor's checklist had a blank space where that room should have been. Nobody talked about it and nobody ever asked, until I did. I had just started working at the school. It was an old building from the 1950s, all creaky floors and narrow hallways with weird little storage rooms and half stairwells that led nowhere. The kind of place where the lights buzz even when they're off, and you always feel like you're being watched from somewhere down the hall. My shift was the evening 1:03 p.m. to 11. After the kids were gone and the teachers cleared out, it was just me, a mop bucket, and the hum of old pipes echoing through empty walls. I first noticed the crying about 3 weeks into the job. It was a soft sound, almost like humming at first, drifting down the stairwell as I swept the second-floor hallway near the east end. I assumed it was a teacher, maybe a student staying late, but when I checked, all the classrooms were empty. The lights were off, lockers shut. Still, the sound kept coming low, steady, like someone stifling sobs. Curious but cautious, I followed it upstairs. The closer I got to the third floor, the colder the air became. Not just cooler, but truly cold, like walking into a meat locker. And then the sound got clearer, crying. A girl's voice, thin and wet with sorrow, coming from behind the door of the sealed bathroom. It made no sense. That bathroom had been padlocked since I arrived. I'd walked past it every night, the heavy rusted lock and faded caution tape a familiar sight. But now the crying was unmistakable, slow, rhythmic, and heartbreaking. I pressed my ear to the door. Someone was inside. Not yelling, not calling for help, just sobbing. Long, deep breaths broken by whimpers. I backed away. My instincts told me to leave it alone, to let someone else deal with it. But then I remembered the master key ring on my cart. I figured maybe the school board forgot to remove someone's access. Maybe a student snuck in. Maybe this was all some prank I hadn't been warned about. I went and got the keys. The lock was old, but opened with a click. The hinges creaked loud enough to echo down the hallway as I pushed the door open. Inside was darkness and the sharp stain of mildew. The smell hit first mold, standing water, and something metallic like old pennies or dried blood. I reached for the light switch and flicked it. The fluorescent lights buzzed, flickered, and then held steady. The bathroom was small, 3 stalls, a sink, and a large rectangular mirror above it. The floor was dry but stained, like water had pooled there once and never dried right. The crying had stopped. I called out, but no one responded. I checked each stall, slowly pushing the doors open one by one. All empty. No one was there. That's when I looked into the mirror. At first, everything seemed normal. Just me standing alone, pale under the flickering lights. But then I noticed something behind me, just at the edge of the frame. A shape. A girl. She was standing a few feet back, in the middle of the room. Thin, motionless, with long, stringy hair and a uniform that looked decades old. She wasn't in the room, I could only see her in the mirror. I turned around fast. Nothing. The bathroom was empty. But when I looked back into the mirror, she was closer. Her face was pale, her eyes black and sunken. Her mouth was twisted, not in a scream, but in something far worse, a silent, frozen plea, like someone trapped in the moment of begging for help, long after help could do anything. I blinked. She moved again. This time her hand was raised, reaching toward the back of my head. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, left the lights on, the door wide open, the keys dangling from the lock. I bolted down the stairs and didn't stop until I reached the exit and burst out into the parking lot. The night air was warm and thick, but I was shivering. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. The next day I told my supervisor everything. He listened quietly, then sighed. He didn't call me crazy. He didn't laugh. He just said, "That bathroom hasn't been touched since 2009. Girl died in there. Suicide. They sealed it and told us not to use it anymore." Kids started saying they heard her crying, saw her in the mirror. Parents complained. "That's why it's locked." He paused, looked me dead in the eyes, and added, "You're not the first to open it, but you might want to be the last." They relocked the door that afternoon. I watched the district maintenance team weld the hinges shut. They didn't ask any questions, just did their job and left. Nobody ever brought it up again. But sometimes when I'm cleaning late and the halls are especially quiet, I'll pass that third-floor landing and hear it again, the low, wet sound of someone crying. It doesn't beg for help, it doesn't scream, it just waits. And every time I pass a bathroom mirror now, I look fast, because I'm afraid if I look too long, I'll see her behind me. And this time, she'll be closer. I didn't realize we had brought something back with us until we were halfway home. We had taken 21 kids. I counted 22 on the return bus. It was supposed to be a simple half-day trip to the historical fort an hour outside our small town. I'm a 7th grade teacher, and I've done this trip every May for the last 5 years without issue. It's the same itinerary: bus ride out, guided tour, lunch, back by 2:30. Routine. Familiar. This time, it felt off from the start, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. For starters, the morning was oddly overcast. Not raining, just that thick, heavy gray sky that presses down on you, where the air feels damp and still. The fort was unusually quiet, too. Usually, there are other school groups there, but that day, we were the only ones. No other buses in the lot, no park rangers visible. Just a laminated sign on the visitor center door that said, "Welcome, Lewis Middle," and the door already propped open. Our guide was a woman I hadn't seen before, tall, thin, dressed in a stiff gray uniform like a reenactor, but something about her felt outdated, like a costume that hadn't been updated in decades. Her smile was polite but cold, and her voice had this strange flatness to it, as if she were reciting lines from a teleprompter. She didn't introduce herself, just said, "We'll begin in the North Barracks." The kids were mostly well-behaved, a little bored. A few wandered a bit, but I kept counting them as we moved from room to room. I counted every time we switched locations. I always do. Always 21. The only time I lost sight of anyone was in the old officers' quarters, where the guide let the students roam through on their own for a few minutes. I stayed by the door, watching them enter and exit. A couple kids came out spooked, said the rooms were cold, even though the rest of the fort was warm and stuffy. That was the only part of the trip where I felt something was really wrong. I don't know how to describe it. The air inside those quarters felt stagnant, like a place holding its breath. It smelled faintly of iron and mildew, and I swear the walls looked damp. One of the kids asked if someone had spilled something, but when I checked, the floor was dry, just cold. We wrapped up, ate lunch outside, and boarded the bus for the return trip. I counted heads, just like always. I got 22. I assumed I'd miscounted. I did it again. Still 22. I figured maybe one of the kids invited a sibling last minute, or maybe a parent had joined us without me noticing. It had been a slightly chaotic morning. The ride home was quiet. Too quiet. I was sitting in the front row, going through my clipboard, when I heard whispering behind me. I turned, but everyone looked half asleep or staring out the windows. Then I saw her. 4 rows back on the left. A girl I didn't recognize. Pale, skinny, with long, straight black hair. She was wearing an old-fashioned dress navy blue with tiny white buttons all the way up to her neck. It looked like something out of a black and white photo. She didn't look at me, just sat completely still, hands folded in her lap. I didn't want to cause a scene, so I quietly asked my co-chaperone, Mrs. Fields, if she knew the girl. She frowned and said, "I don't think she was on the bus this morning." That's when I got nervous. When we pulled into the school parking lot, I stood at the front of the bus and asked the kids to exit one by one so I could check them off the list. I held a pen in my hand, my finger tracing each name as they passed. 21 names, 21 kids. She was still sitting in her seat, last row now. I called to her gently, "Honey, you can come off now." She didn't move. Mrs. Field stepped onto the bus behind me and froze. "She's not getting up," she whispered. I walked slowly down the aisle. Her head was tilted slightly down, her eyes open but unfocused, staring at the back of the seat in front of her. "Are you okay?" I asked. No answer. I knelt beside her and asked for her name. Still nothing. Just shallow breathing. Her skin was pale, almost bluish, like she'd been out in the cold for too long. But the bus had been warm. I gently reached out to touch her shoulder. The moment my fingers brushed her, every light on the bus flickered, and then she was gone. Not disappeared in a puff of smoke or anything dramatic, she just wasn't there anymore. 1 second she was in the seat. The next, the seat was empty. My hand was touching nothing but air. Mrs. Fields gasped behind me, and I heard the bus driver swear and scramble out of the front seat. The remaining kids had all gotten off already. We searched the bus. We searched the lot. We called the school office, then the police. Of course, they found nothing. No sign of her anywhere. And there was no record of a girl fitting her description enrolled in our district. Later that evening, I went back over the photos taken during the trip shots the kids had sent to the group chat. There she was, in 2 separate photos, standing off to the side, half obscured. In the first, she was by the stone wall of the officers' quarters, her face barely visible, but her dress unmistakable. In the second, she was reflected in one of the old glass windows behind a group selfie, her eyes locked on the camera. I tried showing them to the principal, but by the next morning, the photos were gone from my phone. Deleted. I asked the students, and they all insisted they never saw her. Not on the bus, not at the fort, not in the pictures. But I remember the chill that came when I saw her up close. I remember her eyes gray, empty, and ancient. And I remember that we brought 21 kids, but we brought something else back too. Something that never needed a name.